Hello everyone! Welcome to the XX Factor episode 8. Thanks for coming to join us. So the XX Factor, for anyone who's new, is the show where we talk about the conspiracy theories and various nonsense beliefs behind the gender critical movement, which is the UK's and now the world's anti-trans movement, or like the attempt to make an anti-trans movement look legitimate. So my name is Katy Montgomerie. I'm a trans woman and I argue on the internet a lot. And this is my lovely co-host.
My name is Christa Peterson. I am a philosophy PhD student and another internet arguer.
So this week I think we're going to be picking up. So a while ago we tried to have an episode and I messed it up because of the time zones and there was a scheduling issue. So we're going to hopefully pick up from and discuss that kind of stuff. So this is going to be talking about sort of the idea that trans people are an attack on children. So I guess just bear that in mind because this is probably going to get heavy again. This show often gets quite heavy and stressful. So just bear that in
mind. The idea that trans rights are like a Trojan horse for pedophilia. So in this episode, we won't be talking about actual child sexual abuse. We'll be talking about accusations of it, but not like descriptions of it's actually.
But still potentially a stressful topic. Though perhaps before we get onto that, I just wanted to mention this article that I had just seen, I think today, which is interesting. So this is our friend Ray Blanchard, who is the guy who came up with the idea of autogynephilia and homosexual transsexual as the ways of explaining what a trans woman is, basically. It doesn't really talk about trans men.
The attachment to what we were talking about last time with Ken Zucker. So Blanchard was in charge of the adult gender identity clinic at CAMH's hospital in Toronto. And Zucker was in charge of the children's side. Blanchard stopped working there in like 2008, 2009. Around them.
Yeah, and he's been quite influential on, I guess, trans healthcare internationally. He's quite a big deal. He's contributed to, he's published a lot and stuff. But he's also, his whole theories are just a load of garbage, and people have realised that they don't really make any sense, and he's still clinging on to them, and the gender critical movement loves him because part of his thing is that more than half of trans women are just perverts and the other half are like confused gay men. But anyway, this week, I think he went on a podcast with someone called Edward Dutton. And I was reading the article, and sometimes, these articles that explain what happened, they make certain accusations. So it's just always worth Googling these people. But so if you Google Edward Dutton, so this is the guy whose podcast he went on, the Wikipedia, so because he was quite confident making this claim of him, says, Edward Dutton is an English anthropologist and white supremacist known for authoring controversial racialist articles for fringe far-right journals such as Mankind Quarterly and Open Psych. Dutton is associated with the white nationalist group Patriotic Alternative. So that is literally the first thing that comes up when you Google this man's name. So, I've Googled, at least Googled everyone I've been on a show with. I think just in case their Wikipedia comes up saying they're a white supremacist, because, it's not really what I want to be associated with. Anyway, on this show, he discussed a few dubious things, made a few comments about trans people, the classic. And there was one little comment that I thought was interesting. I guess this is just a classic stereotype, but he said basically trans women are or either autogynephiles, the pervert group, or they are, and then he described other trans women, so this is straight trans women attracted to men, as drag queens who take their work seriously.
Jesus.
So this is the guy who was in charge of healthcare at this gender clinic in Canada for however long for adults.
Yeah, right? And in this gender clinic, if you were going to get if you're going to get surgery, I think any kind of sexual confirmation surgery in Canada, in Ontario, until he stopped working at CAMH, you had to go to his clinic in order to get approval. It was the only option in Ontario. I think it was the only option at like the same clinic until like 2015 or so, but he wasn't there towards the end. Just so everyone was like mandatorily subjected to this.
It's so disgusting. And he's talking about gatekeeping, and gatekeeping is quite a complicated topic because in one sense, diagnosing people before they get treatment is gatekeeping, and some people would campaign against that and others wouldn't. But then when we talk about like unnecessary gatekeeping for trans people, we don't just mean diagnosis, though many people would include that, but we mean things like having to like socially transition for 2 years before they will even attempt to diagnose you, and various things like that. And he is a massive fan of very heavy, strict gatekeeping, including things like real life experience, but also him deciding whether he thinks you'll pass and like things like that, whether you're going to integrate in his, just his guess basically about that kind of thing, and what your motivations are, and, whether you're basically a professional enough drag queen or whatever. So there's, he's a real proponent of strong gatekeeping and is therefore a massive critic of WPATH's current suggestions of how to, suggestion isn't the right word, they're qualified criteria for trans healthcare. So, but it's just interesting that he chose to go on this white supremacist, according to Wikipedia, and according to this article's podcast. So I'll put that link in the description if anyone wants to read about that. There's some interesting comments from this Edward Dutton guy about different people of different races. Anyway.
Has Blanchard said anything about it? Do you know, since this?
No, I haven't. I haven't done much Twitter today, which has been good. I actually had a barbecue in my garden, which was nice to be off Twitter. But no, I just saw this article mentioned by, I can't remember who, and I just had a read of it. So, we'll see what his response is. Perhaps we can update people next week.
Yeah, cool. Ready?
Oh, yes. So let's get on to today's main topic. How exciting. Ta-da! Christa's done another really nicely laid out presentation, which clashes with the surrounding background.
The flowers to this, so it's like joining with your border.
Oh, that's nice. Maybe I could pick a more like fitting color scheme though.
No, this one has bees on it, so okay. Kind of crashing quickly. So this we had covered in episode 6.5 before Katy realized that we were having a time zone problem.
Sorry.
So just kind of leading us into these conspiracy theories that directly about children, like pedophilia directly. And we had these kind of conspiracy theories that trans women with a sexual fetish were like tricking children, young trans men, children, they're like teenagers, right? These are teenagers and maybe like 25-year-olds.
Yeah, up to 25s. They usually talk about up to 25s because they just want to stop everyone from transitioning.
So there's this theory that they were just like being kind of tricked into transitioning by people who are seeking to legitimize their fetish. So we have kind of all sorts of people saying that like the AGP tail is wagging the puberty blocking dog. You often see like a less explicit version of this conspiracy theory where people will just be like talking about how it's only trans women who are pushing child's transition. There's like this weird stuff that like isn't fully bringing it home, but it's kind of like a common refrain among this side.
Right, yeah. I think they often try and sell this idea that everything is just AGP, autogynephile, trans women, like that's the whole trans rights movement, and all the other trans women and all the trans men don't care about having basic rights and healthcare, and don't care about trans kids.
And then we have, so this is Allison Bailey, who again is the LGBT Alliance, one of the founders. She's related, and that was fired from her job because of her Twitter activity around that, and is prominently now suing Stonewall, I think, for contacting her about what was happening. But so this organization was doing a research study looking for LGBTQ youth that are aged 12 to 23 to take part in research. It's a questionnaire about their experiences with healthcare. Allison says, a 12-year-old is a child. Stop putting children in with adults and labeling them LGBTQ+. Let children grow up without adult agendas. What you're doing is a safeguarding red flag. It's dangerous, and sticking LGBTQ on it doesn't make it any less so.
This is just so, like, it's just a classic, like, thing you get from all the standard gammon homophobes where they're like, oh, kids can't be gay, let kids be kids. It's like, that's rubbish. That's just, I mean, scientifically false. And anyone who's ever talked to anyone or anyone who's ever been a child knows that they're attracted to people most of the time before they reach 18. Like, everyone knows that. That's part of growing up, isn't it? Like, people get to teenagers and they all start fancying each other. And of course that includes some kids being gay, like, obviously. Nonsense. Anyway.
And so she adds, what they are doing is telling 12-year-old children who are growing into sexual maturity that 20-something men and women are their peers. They are not. It helps facilitate grooming and abuse. So again, this is a survey, right? This is a research survey. What will happen if you are 12 years old and respond to this is they will give you a survey to fill out about your experiences within education, healthcare, and home. A survey.
So this isn't like a club or a meeting or.
So here is her.
Oh God, look at this.
She repeated this like a million times.
She's just copied and pasted it.
Yeah, just a ton.
This is LGBT Alliance's strategy. They just send out so many messages because, like, they wrote to all the MPs and all this kind of stuff, and they just need one thing to stick. That's like their way of doing it.
And so she says, what turns a child into an adult? Puberty. It follows that if a 10-year-old is given puberty blockers and 8 years later, legally an adult, decides to take cross-sex hormones, having missed this crucial stage in human development, is this really the consent of an adult?
They don't give them puberty blockers for 8 years. What's she talking about?
Yeah. She says adulthood isn't merely, also they don't normally, so with puberty blockers, right, they start them after kids start puberty, which in some kids is like 10, in some kids is like 12. But it's not like, since you haven't had any experience in puberty at all normally. And this is why puberty blockers and gender dysphoria are completely different to puberty blockers for precocious puberty. A 7-year-old taking puberty blockers to stop an early puberty will be on them for a short time before experiencing full puberty. A gender dysphoric child on puberty blockers will not and will never complete normal development. To see advocates of puberty blockers for gender dysphoria insist that children can consent to them, that it's about bodily autonomy, that it brings joy, turns my stomach. Those of us that know what grooming looks like know what this language is painfully close to.
So that's also like just ridiculous, because obviously the whole point in like HRT or giving people hormones is you do go through puberty. I mean that's literally what it is. And then like this comment here about that it brings them joy, turns my stomach. I mean that's it. That's literally it. The idea that trans kids are being helped by this makes her feel sick. I mean that, of course, that's like what we all know. Doesn't matter about whether it's good for them. It doesn't matter if it makes them happy. It doesn't matter if the reason that she's opposing them is totally made up, and doesn't matter for the science. It just makes her feel ill. So
I don't know why I missed this one. So in history, she said, puberty blockers block physiological, sexual, and cognitive development, and they deliver physically, sexually, and emotionally immature adults into the arms of big pharma and the lobby. This is just so conspiratorial, right? Like,
yeah.
This grooming thing is a common theme. Um, so Keith Jordan, who is he's in charge of maybe parents of ROGD kids.
Oh God, yeah, this guy's horrible. Sorry.
Says children becoming transgender is a safeguarding issue. Children are groomed into believing they have a gender identity at odds with their sex. This grooming is by its nature sexual. Wolf says gender activists face no social stigma on the left anymore for comparing women to fascists bent on genocide, for saying that we don't want men touching us, or laying their hands on girls without permission or a valid medical reason. This is mass grooming for sexual coercion. Again, Speak Up for Women. This is just an article about trans kids. Say the broadcaster is grooming children. The Gender Mapper, which is the new American starting initiative to map every gender clinic, which I think is every place that prescribes hormones, says 200 plus gender clinics for kids in the US and counting, and they say grooming our children in plain sight.
So
it's not. Go ahead.
I was just going to say this Gender Mapper, just to point out, isn't like a trans initiative. This is like a copy of an anti-abortion like strategy to map out where these things are happening in order to just kind of, we're not suggesting violence or intimidation, but what else is the map for, huh?
Yeah, right. And it's like this is supposed to be like troubling, this idea that this kind of healthcare is
being offered around the country
instead of like only in one place. Yeah, it's not always clear what they mean by grooming, right? So grooming is, in normal usage, refers to like the process of getting children, like, I don't know, kind of like a frog in the pot type thing of like ramping up into sexual abuse of children.
So, like, part of their strategy is grooming has a less, like, when most of the time when you say grooming children, you mean some disgusting sex thing, but it also does have the meaning of, like, you could say you were grooming a child to be a good, I don't know why I'm thinking of this example. I think it might be the Google one, like grooming a child to be a good jockey or for horse racing or something like, and it can be a non-sexual, but that's kind of an outdated use or not as common a use. But it does give them this like flexibility where they'll say like, you're grooming children, and then you're like, this disgusting, this is just generic anti-LGBT where you're claiming every LGBT person is a pedo, and they're like, no, that's not what we're saying. We meant you're just trying to get children to be LGBT, like as a back off, but that isn't what they mean. This is a sexual accusation, like this Keith Jordan guy has very explicitly said. Yeah, but like he's the kind of idiot who says the quiet part loud anyway. So, but
yeah. So sometimes for them it has like it's ambiguous, I think, between the sexual use and like the brainwashing use. And it's not, yeah. And I think some of them do mean the brainwashing use, because at this point, they are kind of all using it. And I don't know. But it's definitely not the like grooming this person to take over my role as president of this society, right?
Yeah.
Groningen so he was banned on Twitter, I think, for accusing someone of grooming, and is a big user of calling this stuff grooming. Here he says, some thoughts on grooming. Jimmy Savile is not dead 10 years, and the BBC is forcing gender identity ideology down our throats.
That is as if they're related. Like, that's just ridiculous. So for anyone who doesn't know, Jimmy Savile was a like UK celebrity, and he was quite a big deal for like decades in like 70s and 80s. And he like had a program where he worked with children, and like the idea was that kids write in with their dreams and he makes the dreams come true. And it turned out it was a massive pedo for like the whole time, and loads of people knew about it and just like covered it up for it. And it was like the shame of the like British media and the BBC. And here he's just like, here's a pedo, and not even 10 years after he's died, there are trans people, like as if it's even arguably related. And it's this desperate attempts to accuse particularly trans people, but all LGBT people, of being paedophiles. Like that, it's just desperate to do it.
Yeah, so here, and this is from the same post, it says, we have been groomed at a societal level by people who are supposed to be the adults in the room. The BBC should either stop showing these dishonest, contentious programs, which are programs about young trans people, or conduct the national debate that is so desperately needed on this matter. Jimmy Savile?
Yeah, Jimmy Savile, but he spelt it wrong there.
Jimmy Savile is online, and he is connected with every other Jimmy Savile in the world. This is a national emergency, and the BBC is failing us again.
So this is like I know this just obviously isn't rational, and there's no attempt to make this a rational argument, but like there's always a part of my brain which just tries to take these things on rationally. And like here he is talking about a program which just shows a trans kid. Like, even if you are the kind of knobhead who thinks that trans kids shouldn't be a thing or whatever, it's still just a fact that some kids are trans kids, and there are thousands of them, and they exist, and having a program on them showing them just living a normal life is interesting for people, because people don't all know trans kids. And like he's just straight up saying, by showing just trans kids being normal, just like a normal program with some kid, is somehow grooming people. And it's this kind of thing. It's the same like propaganda they have about gay people. Like, oh, if you show a gay kiss, if you show that gay people can be normal, then you're grooming people to be gay. Like, it's the same. Like, it's just the same again and again. It's the same recycled homophobia. And yeah, and then just randomly shoehorning in this, mentioning Jimmy Savile. And like, maybe not so much outside of the UK, but like in the UK, Jimmy Savile like he is like the paedophile. Like, it's such a 100% connection. When someone says paedophile, someone says Jimmy Savile, and vice versa. So, you know, the reason he's saying this is literally just explicitly to say paedophile, trans people, and that's it. That's just the whole point in this. There's no argument here. There's no evidence here or anything. It's just trying to conflate these things together in people's mind to get people scared. Yeah,
and this is like QAnon level stuff, right? It's like,
yeah,
you have this of Jimmy Savile's. It's a national emergency. This is just like really extreme conspiratorial stuff.
And I just want to add one thing on here where he says we need to have so what was it? The national debate. Yeah, so he's going for, we need to stop showing these dishonest things. So that's what he really wants, is them to just stop mentioning trans kids at all, shut it down. But one of the things that the gender critical movement had success with at the start was combating, like, LGBT people's thing was like, you shouldn't be debating our lives, just let us live our lives. And then they came in and was like, oh, you're trying to silence debate, we need a national debate, like, and so that's been this like calling card they've had for a while, which has historically worked, so they would like to try and stick to it. But it doesn't make sense, because they don't actually ever want to debate. They never want to debate these things. And also a national debate, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, what we're doing now at the moment is just fear-mongering about trans people. I would love it if, instead of just fear-mongering, you got on a load of experts in the media and had this debate, because the debate should just be saying, oh, look, here's what all the science says, so that's the debate over. They don't want a debate. They want fear-mongering, and they want to just stop trans people being shown. I mean, these two things are contradictory, aren't they? Because if we were having this national debate and we need the whole nation to see what trans kids are like, then having a program which just follows the life of some of them, or just like a drama about a trans kid, that's the national debate. And so it's him just saying, I don't want to debate, we need to debate. It's just nonsense. It's just such garbage. It's the weakest. He's the weakest arguer of his position, and he just doesn't care. It's just propaganda. Sorry, it winds me up a bit.
No, the national debate or national conversation is like a common line.
Yeah.
And notably, these things never come to a national conclusion ever, right? It's just a like permanent uncertainty about.
That's the strategy, because there is a conclusion. Like, we know from the evidence that trans kids exist and that transition is good for them, but we can just constantly just keep talking about it as a society. I mean, they made the decision about whether to give trans kids healthcare 30 years ago. Like, that's when, like, we had the debate about whether trans people should be able to use women's facilities like decades ago, it was done. But they just want it to keep going and going and going until they win, and then just suddenly stop and everyone shut up and you're not allowed to talk about trans people anymore. Yeah, it's a classic reactionary anti-human rights strategy.
National debate forever.
Yeah.
So this is Jessica Taylor, who is one of the more serious faces of the gender critical movement.
I've got her book, actually. I haven't read it yet.
You had a book of the pre-gender critical, right? That was popular.
I've got her newest book, which is Women Are Blamed for Everything. But I don't think it's about trans people. I haven't read it. Anyway, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, so she's like relatively mainstream within the movement figure. She says, if we go down this route, which is something related to children being able to consent for medical care, for trans medical care in particular. If we go down this route, it's only a matter of time before the pro-pedophile movements start using Gillick to argue down the age of consent. Mark my words, it'll come. A says, I've been saying this for a while. Love has no age limits. Will have its own inclusion flag before long. B says, it's always been in the wings. My sense is that puberty blockers are plan B to lower the age of consent. Prolonged prepubescent people who fall within the age of consent. C says, oh God, yes. I think this has always been the end game. D says, the complete lack of safeguarding is the giveaway in this. I cannot think of any other explanation for the direction which this is heading. This is why it should be opposed. We need to hold the line on this one. E, obviously. F, the evidence for this is everywhere. G, how do we know this isn't already what's happening?
This is like, it's like someone said, oh, can you show me what it looks like when people on the internet are in a conspiracy theory? That's like the set, like, oh, it's already happening. Yes, this is their plan. Yes, they're trying to keep people young forever. Like, we're just missing this Immortality Project reference and we'd have the full house. Like, it's so ridiculous because Gillick competence is about healthcare. So it just isn't about sex. They're just unrelated concepts. Like, children can't consent to sex with adults. It's just nonsense. And it's nothing to do with Gillick competence. Rubbish argument.
The key thing about like children not being able to consent to sex with adults, right? It's not like innate properties of the child, it's the predatory nature of the relationship, right? It's about like one person having this like just like by having intrinsically way more power. It's not about children being unable, like constitutionally unable to make any important decisions about themselves. Teenagers make tons of important decisions, right, about their lives. Separate.
Like starting birth control, which is what Gillick competence is for. And that's why it's, so dangerous that they're using their anti-abortion lawyers to attack it, because contraception is like essential for, for young girls. And so is access to abortion. And yeah, it's just horrifying that they're just trying to weaken it out of some nonsense conspiracy theory. And it's for trans kids too, obviously.
Yeah. I always forget, but like I grew up in Missouri, and there was this like insecurity around reproductive like healthcare access, and it's just so grim. Like it's just such a central part of like what young women need and what feminists are supposed to be like defending for all women, including young women, and then just like throwing it out as because maybe if young women can make their own decisions about birth control, then people of the same age might also be able to make their own decisions about being trans. We have a flicker of awareness. A flicker of awareness here from Z, who says, I don't particularly disagree with the original tweet, but it struck me how I've seen the same argument used many years ago by a very different part of the political spectrum, and you'd be 100% right-wing to express it. Ideas trump camps, in my opinion. This idea is bad. It is a conspiracy theory that is made to demonize LGBT people.
It's weird how you get these people who do kind of notice it, and I've pointed this out to. I point it all the time. I say this is just an anti-gay rights argument that you've just changed the word to trans, and like they'll come in and be like, no, that's not relevant. What this not relevant? It's totally different. Gay people are nothing like trans people. All these kind of deflection arguments. And every now and then you'll get someone who'll be like, well, they are similar, but this is different. And like, why? Explain to me why it's different. And oh, it's because it's trans people. Yeah, but that doesn't make it different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, at least in the US in particular, there's like a kind of, people like the idea of being a like nonpartisan independent thinker who like might agree with one party on some issues and some of the other. You don't really see them embracing that here. I mean, they normally kind of want to not portray themselves. And one of the big successes, I think, of the gender critical movement has been kind of, in much of the public perception, severing this from, in particular, like Christian right, kind of anti-LGBT things, which I think is like pretty essential for getting it to pass. Is not just identical to the anti-gay movement.
Yeah. Though I think that's going to get weaker. I think it's getting weaker now. Like the conversion therapy argument is basically LGBT Alliance and then a load of Christian extremists pushing against the ban and no one else. And then also with all the Americans entering the fray, and you've got, people like, what's his name? Bummer. It was on tip of my tongue. Matt something, who's like he's the guy who describes himself as a fascist and a tyrant. He's like a Christian extremist. I don't know. But anyway, saying all the same gender critical arguments, and they're just so openly against gay marriage and against gay rights too, that I think it's going to be much harder for gender critical to separate those things in people's minds as we start seeing all the American arguments coming over here in American news. So
we'll see. It had been a while since I was like in high school, since I had seen a fully developed anti-gay argument. And a little while ago, I was at it's because this American, I'm going to mix this up. So there's the American College of Pediatrics, I think, which is the fake pediatric professional organization. Yeah. And I was on their website, and so they're pro anti-gay conversion therapy, in addition to gender identity conversion therapy. And I was on their website, and it's just exactly the same argument, right? It's that, if teenagers start identifying as gay, and then they start becoming sexually active with that, it'll just become like the only way they can see themselves. And they just will they should have, if they're going to choose a gay lifestyle, they should wait until they're over 18.
Same old. Yeah. And it's interesting because I seem to remember a while ago in a previous episode, we mentioned when Dr. Stock was mentioning all of these true, real scientific organizations that back her up. And that organization was one that she mentioned. But they support gay conversion therapy. Well, what? It's just so, yeah. And then they'll just do this little dance. I don't have to agree with them on everything. It's like they have two identical ideas with just two different targets, and you agree for one of them. And we're saying, well, why? What about the other one? They're like, oh, don't talk about that, please.
Yeah, and it's like the place where it starts, right, is appealing to them as experts, as though this is a legitimate perspective that is informed by their medical expertise. It's clearly ideological, right? As it just by the fact that they have this consistent position against all LGBT people. And then it is we're like, oh, they're still experts on trans people. They're ideologically motivated about gay people, but still experts about trans people. This is just another person saying a thing about prepubescent kid over the age of consent. I wonder why they're so keen on that idea. Down here we have Teal saying everyone should watch the brilliant Derek Jensen, who is the founder of, what is wrong with my brain today? DGR, could clarify the blatant and shocking ties between queer theory and pedophilia. So this is a common thing about queer theory being a pedophile movement. This is a kind of gross and kind of general feature of a lot of kind of radical political thinkers in the 70s, 80s. You see this in radical feminists. Andrea Dworkin in Woman Hating has a weird, it's people who are thinking about how sex could be radically different from the way it is in our culture, where it's so bound up with power and stuff, where pedophilia is obviously exploitative, and who are thinking oh, well, maybe if we could there was no more like power and stuff related with sex, then the age of consent could be like whatever. So you do see this like intellectual like flirting with the idea that like pedophilia isn't intrinsically bad and it's like the result of it's kind of like other social stuff. But if they are claiming to be radical feminists, they are definitely not immune to this. Right? This is like just this. It was dumb. I don't know what else to say. It's like uncomfortable and dumb. But
yeah, I mean,
it's not
like
theory at all.
Quite famously, Jermaine Greer wrote some weird thing about teenage boys, didn't she?
No, it wasn't just very. I think she had like a photo book. Very gross. Yeah. But yeah, not just queer theory. People who are like trying to radically reconstrue sex, including radical feminists.
Yeah. And this also got like intentionally conflated in with the genuine LGBT rights movement push to have the age of consent the same for gay people as it was for straight people already. So it used to be in the UK that you could legally have sex from 16 or 18 or whatever it is today if you were straight, but if you were gay, it was like 21. And they were saying, well, that's ridiculous. It should be the same for gay and straight people. And then that meant that like they can say, oh, well, what about these queer theory philosophers who have written some dubious nonsense? I don't know. But then they say, oh, and look, they are actually trying to lower the age of consent. And that's disgusting. And they tried to conflate those two things together. Like I see that a lot. They're like, oh, well, how come they actually campaigned to lower the age of consent? And it'd be like on Stonewall's lists of achievements, we lowered the age of consent. It's like, yeah, they lowered it from, something ridiculous to the same as straight people. And that's the important thing, that it's the same for everyone. And then we can have that argument about what age it should be, 18 or whatever, for everyone and not just for straight people.
Yeah, right. So you had this pretty widespread theory that like gay adults were like targeting young people to make them gay.
Yeah.
Right. And so you had this kind of like difference in how it was construed because of it, which is obviously inappropriate and bullshit.
And just a little bit like today, what we're talking about of trans people targeting children and trying to make them trans. It's the same. Ridiculous.
Yeah. So here, NHS Gender Identity Service has kicked off its appeal against that High Court ruling on puberty blockers. Someone says, thank God, and I hope they win quickly. Forcing young trans people to go through unwanted puberty inconsistent with their gender is unspeakably cruel, right? Which is right? It's like a period like that's very distressing for people and very anxiety, just awful. And Kay says, can't imagine why a man would want a teenager to have their mental and sexual development stunted so they remain prepubescent after they're past the age of consent. No, can't imagine at all. In general, you often see the people saying wilder things are not like main figureheads, but they will be like well integrated in the movement. So Kay here is followed by like WHRC, Sex-Based Rights Caucus, LGBT Alliance, Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights.
All the same crew.
And mainstream crew.
All the people who just signed this letter complaining about a trans woman being nominated for a Women's Writing Prize along with a load of dead authors. Did you see that? Sorry, Karen.
So here, Kay shares this Guardian article. It says, High Court to decide if children can consent to gender reassignment. Kay says, this could be a turning point. Elle says, oh God, the implications are huge, not just for gender reassignment. If kids can consent to that, what else can they consent to? Tons of stuff. Kids can consent to tons of stuff. They cannot consent to being preyed on, but it simply follows that kids, again, teenagers, don't have the ability to consent to things that have a big impact on their life, right? Because who else is going to? They are autonomous individuals who should have control over their own life. They should not be vulnerable to being preyed on and manipulated. That is not what is happening here. Kay says, that's the thing. It would open the doors to some pretty terrifying claims of consent by some very bad people. M says, and that's exactly the point. All of this is simply about pedophilia and the removal of a parent guardianship and protection of their children. And blah, blah, blah. Yeah, L is also who's like fully integrated, followed by all of these mainstream people within the movement. Similar thing here where someone says, just 10 years ago, if I had woken up and identified as a helicopter, one of the two jokes, I would have had a visit from adult social care. Now it is perfectly acceptable and legal. It's not really. I mean, it's always been legal. It's not more legal now. If I can go to my local library and join as a giant panda, surely not.
Just
true.
make it up, mate. Just make it up. Who cares? It doesn't have to be true, does it? Like, yeah, just say that same rubbish joke that wasn't funny in 2003. Like, whatever.
How much longer do we have before we as a society implode? H says that is exactly what they want our society to do. J says, I suspect it's to make us so confused that we eventually agree sex with children is okay. This is maybe like a different route to the conspiracy, which is like it just implements general confusion, and this is dumb. Again, followed by the letter mainstream in the movement. Here, Jay says, I'm convinced that some trans activists have this evil agenda, that this is their goal. We cannot allow them an inch in twisting language/meaning, or we'll end up betraying the innocent. Just look at the library drag queen stories. We're at war for the minds of our children.
So dramatic. Like, drag queen story time is just like a man wearing a dress reading a storybook to kids. Like, why is this suddenly a sign of the fall of society and an evil agenda and like forcing sex on children? It's so ridiculous. It's a man wearing a dress. Like, calm down. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah, and here I think you see like the kind of extreme rhetoric that this kind of conspiracy theory kind of naturally produces, where H says, indeed, we are at war, but no shot has been fired yet. This slow, relentless river of the absurd and repugnant flows unabated for a reason. Quote, time. Silencing the shepherds makes easier the slaughter of our blind lambs. J says, love your turn of phrase and agree. This is a Cold War, every bit as important as the freedoms we defended in the 50s to 80s.
That just earlier you talked about can't remember what his name was, Keith or something, Dad ROGD.
Yeah.
He writes a lot of things that talk about it being a war and shots haven't been fired yet and that kind of stuff. I was just going to try and find one, and then always just has a little disclaimer at the bottom, obviously I don't mean violence. Like, yeah, right, mate. It's terrifying.
This is a poster from somewhere that has for like just kind of the description of what allyship consists in. It says, listen and learn from marginalized people, embrace discomfort, understand your own privilege, and use it for good. And says, circles, embrace discomfort, and says, excuse me, girls should do what? Stop teaching girls to ignore instincts that keep them alive, please. O says, embrace discomfort, eh? Even when a man is getting his willy out and indecently exposing himself? When are people within police services going to see danger to children hiding in plain view? Jay says, there's a pedophile agenda behind this trend. Slowly, girls are being educated to ignore their feelings and to submit to gross indignities with men. This is extreme, right?
Yeah.
Just detached from anything real. So we had made this up until here, early March, before we got confused by the time and then diverted. But in late March, this kind of conspiracy theory about trans rights being this conspiracy to lower the age of consent, this pro-pedophile movement, it's kind of like just gotten much more mainstream. So the Women Human Rights Campaign. So the WHRC is seemingly a US-based organization that has, they have like pretty good legitimizing surface level branding of it's like the Women's Human Rights Campaign. They're signing the Declaration on Women's Human Rights, but they're pretty immediately, they're like pretty extreme.
They're very extreme. They're the ones whose gender recognition inquiry submission explicitly called for the elimination of trans people and for a ban of all trans healthcare. And the Women's Declaration, this WHRC declaration, which groups like LGBT Alliance and For Women Scott have signed, just explicitly calls for a complete and total blanket ban of all trans women from all women's spaces. So that they're not even, like, I don't know how this is, it just must be this presentation that it's a feminist group and that's, supported by these other groups that has made them be able to fly under the radar and not seeming so extreme. These guys are full-on extremists, like a really grim level of extremism. So I think this is one of the groups I've really decided to highlight. Whenever I talk about any of these groups like LGBT Alliance or anyone, I just bring up this group. Go and have a look at the list of groups and people who have signed WHRC. All of them are extremists because the things they're agreeing with aren't just, this isn't just like, oh, we have some concerns about certain trans women at certain stages, the debate that we're having. This is full-on blanket bans of healthcare and basic access to public life, and they're just straight out just saying it out loud. So just really highlight this group because they are really grim.
Yeah, so their WHRC spokeswoman is Kara Dansky, who is the relentless promoter of Jennifer Billick in all of her press, her like Tucker Carlson appearances. And so March they put out this press release saying that IGLA World, the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, which is a federation of LGBT organizations, they say that they're actively promoting a feminist declaration which describes as an alternative to the political declaration made annually by the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. And deep within this declaration, there are provisions urging governments to eliminate laws limiting legal capacity of adolescents to provide consent to sex. Anytime you see people doing the ellipses thing, I think it should be like a 911 alert in your brain. Don't actually come 911. It's like, it's alarms, right? Something shady is like almost always happening. Mallory Moore of Trans Safety Network has a great article about this, which we should link to.
I'll link it, and also I recommend that everyone follows Trans Safety Network on Twitter or whatever social media, because they've come out with a lot of really short and concise and really informative and well-sourced articles about lots of this stuff recently. I really recommend them. Yeah.
Movement tracking research. So here she has highlighted in that all the places, the text that is not included in this claim. So this is, so they pitch it as IGLA World is promoting this feminist declaration, but it's like signed by a bunch of just women's groups, right?
Feminist organizations, yeah. As always. Gender critical is always a war on all the mainstream feminist organizations, just always.
Yeah, and so the context of this suggestion is the idea that respect the rights of all individuals to exercise autonomy over their lives, including their sexualities, identities, and bodies. And then it says, eliminate all laws and policies that punish or criminalize same-sex intimacy, gender affirmation, abortion, HIV transmission, non-disclosure and exposure, or that limit the exercise of bodily autonomy, including laws limiting legal capacity of adolescents, people with disabilities, or other groups to provide consent to sex or sexual and reproductive health services, or laws authorizing non-consensual abortion, sterilization, or contraceptive use. Right, so the context here is that it's bad for adolescents to be subject to laws that criminalize their sexuality, right? Teenagers should be legally able to have sex with each other. Adults should not be legally able to prey on teenagers, right? And we just have here this strategic quoting in order to portray this LGBT organization in particular, right? Somehow none of the other feminist groups matter. This is now suddenly just the LGBT people.
And it's just particularly about groups like Stonewall and ILGA, which the gender critical movement really hate. They're really focused on taking them down. they've been they're looking for this kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm just kind of repeating what you said about ignoring the feminist groups, but specifically targeting people like Stonewall.
Yeah, so this continues. While Women's Human Rights Campaign Australia, this was originally put out by the Australia subgroup, but it's been boosted by does not want teenagers labeled sex offenders for consensual, non-abusive sexual activity with their peers and supports unimpeded access to birth control and abortion. There is concern that these demands would remove the ability to protect children from exploitation by adults and older adolescents. Not if they don't, right? Like, these are often just separate things in the law, right? Like the criminalization of preying on children is like a separate offense. And yeah, so they're acknowledging here, right, that there are like clearly legitimate issues in exactly this area, and then are just fear mongering about like, oh, but maybe this LGBT group secretly means this like nefarious purpose. Here, women's voices matter.
I don't know if you've included this later, but Stonewall have explicitly said that isn't what the document says and isn't what we meant, and of course it isn't. Like, why like, I know that gender critical people just constantly never can say exactly what they mean and always have to sneak it under the radar with a load of dog whistle bullshit. LGBT people don't do that. We're constantly saying explicitly exactly what we want. We want the same rights to marriage as everyone else. We want the same rights to healthcare as everyone else. Like, there's no need for this deception about defending sex-based rights bullshit. Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, just like so just I think it's important to see the difference between like the pitch. Feminism has been co-opted to support an agenda to lower the age of consent. Then like by paragraph like 3, like there's concern that these demands would remove the ability to protect children from exploitation by adults and older adolescents. So like, is it intentional still? It's right. So there is like if you're doing like normal feminism, like maybe you could be like, oh no, I'm concerned that this is vague when we need to, like, importantly, have these protections. And that's not what's happening here, right? It's like we're jumping to, in the whole like branding of it, to the idea that this is sinister, right? It's not that all of the signatories, all of the feminist groups had this concern, and like you think that there might be this bad consequence, right? It's the accusation that there's a sinister motive behind what's happening. They're sneaking it in. Yes, it's gotten big. People have really grabbed on to it. Granahan says, is lowering the age of consent always the end game?
And he's also called it a piece of the pie, but all in capitals, because that relates to, I think it's called Paedophile Information Exchange. It was some group in the 70s of like openly paedophiles who were campaigning for sex between adults and children. Like, it was an actual group, and it was disgusting. And that's they're trying to liken it to this. They're constantly trying to say, oh, maybe Stonewall is the new Paedophile Information Exchange. Maybe trans rights is the new Paedophile Information. It's just such garbage. And it's just the same as this Jimmy Savile thing, where there's no argument here. There's nothing. It's just saying, hey, remember pedos? Hey, LGBT people. Now you're thinking about both of them. Maybe they're related.
Yeah. So I think right now we are seeing this conspiracy theory, which when I originally made this, as you can see, was like something that more high-profile people had kind of hinted at a few times. You were seeing from less high-profile but still networked people in the movement. I think now it's just getting mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, it's been Graham Linehan's thing for ages, calling basically every single trans person a groomer.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's like a shift in it's right. The claim is now that it's like more organized. It's this kind of like organized conspiracy with the end goal of lowering the age of consent. It's not just all these individual bad actors. It is the conspiracy.
Yeah. And also worth pointing out here, you've got the dual picture there on the article, which is a cross between WHRC and then also ALBA. So, it's on the last. Yeah, that one. So ALBA is a new political party in Scotland, and it's basically trying to take on the SNP because the previous leader for the SNP ended up getting accused of sexual assault by 9 different women, and then there was a big fiasco and he lost power, and so he started a new party. And of course, they've gone all in on gender critical, which I think is just what we're about to talk about. So maybe I've just cut you up there.
The deal is I don't know who Alba is.
Yeah.
So
it's Alex Salmond's new party. And he used to be the head of SNP, which is the Scottish National Party, which is the biggest party in Scotland, and are probably going to end up with Scottish independence. So,
so Mallory, in this piece that you guys should check out if you are concerned or interested in this, covers that Alba had a women's conference yesterday as of April 11th, so April 10th, I guess. And Margaret Lynch gave a speech where she pushed this like conspiracy about queer theory and this plot to reduce the consent. A move to embrace queer theory. I guess I need to dig up some of the radical feminist weird stuff around this because it's not that none of this exists in queer theory. It's that it was just like just more generalized weird thing that like people dropped. Right? It turned out that these were bad speculations that they were engaging in, was just a road to nowhere good. But it's just not unique to queer people, and this push to pin it on queer people in particular is just part of such an old conspiracy theory about it, right? Like you can watch like
I mean, the Nazis did this. This was part of their thing against gay people, was saying that they're paedophiles. Like it's pretty much the oldest conspiracy theory against gay people is the idea that they're coming for your kids. Yeah, exhausting.
That is it on that for today. Katie and I are so low energy right now.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you putting that collection of things together. I think that it's super common. I think it's only going to get worse. This idea that LGBT people are, for some reason, paedophiles. Like it's something I've always been aware of. And what's scary about it is watching this work on some lesbian and gay cis people, and even some trans people, but I think for different reasons, who are like part of like LGBT Alliance and stuff, and seeing them just go all in on hating all of the LGBT organizations, claiming that LGBT people are pedophiles. And it's like, you had this for your entire life growing up. You know you did. It was in, like, especially people who are like a generation older than me, they saw this in the mainstream news in the 80s and 90s just all the time, just going on about gay people being pedophiles. And now they're just doing it again. And for sure, when they just, like, there's one thing where it's hard to understand where you're like, this is the same. You know what used to happen to you? You're doing it to someone else. But now, because of how gender critical has moved, they've managed to convince all these people to not just explicitly attack only trans organizations, but to just go after all LGBT organizations. And you see these, like, people saying, oh, like the rainbow flag makes me feel sick because it's for pedophiles and stuff. And then you'll get LGBT Alliance members agreeing with it. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, how have you been so brainwashed into campaigning against your own rights, the organizations fighting for your rights, the people involved in that, and even like your own like symbols of freedom you're now campaigning against because you've been tricked into you've just believed this garbage that you've been fighting against your entire life. And it's just horrible to watch how like successful gender critical has been at I don't think it's many, like the majority of cis, gay, lesbian, bisexual people, it's just garbage. Everyone can see it, but there are some, and it's horrible to watch how well it's worked. And it's also grim to watch people who, I mean, all gender critical people claim to, well, not anymore. Back in 2017, gender critical people generally claimed to support LGBT rights, gay rights. But now, LGBT Alliance has done their little comment about how it's okay to not support gay marriage and why can't we all just get along? And so we just had an instance where the leader of the opposition to our party in power, so the guy in charge of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, visited a explicitly anti-gay church on Easter which is so ridiculous because our previous prime minister visited the same church and got absolutely shredded in the news for it because she's an idiot. And then Keir Starmer goes and visits the same church. And if you Google this church, like the first thing that comes up, or the first thing that used to come up, was Theresa May getting blasted in the news for it. And now it's him. And then so he then issued an apology like 3 days later. Not good enough, rubbish. Anyway, and then another one of the LGBT Alliance founders is like, this is ridiculous. You shouldn't be apologizing. All you should do is just tell them that you don't agree and then just get along. And it's just so nonsense. Like they're trying to, I mean, they're obviously trying to ally up with all the homophobes in order to fight trans people, but just in a way where they've just ended up like just working against gay people. Like when you sign up with these huge organizations like the one we mentioned earlier, the American College of Pediatricians, or whichever one is the fake one, and you're like, oh yeah, we like these guys, oh we don't really support them at that, but then you just end up blindly supporting them, and then you end up supporting all their initiatives like against Stonewall, against ILGA and stuff, and you're just part of an anti-gay movement. Like that's just what it is now. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
Very anecdotal observation, but my sense is that like a above average portion of the LGBT people who are big, hardline gender critical, is that they are definitely not exclusively, but disproportionately people who came out later in life, and so have not like themselves identified as LGBT at a time when there was just mainstream anti-gay propaganda. I don't know. It's
but like
Bev Jackson, who like was right like involved in like early gay rights, like fighting a like, just exact analog to what she's now doing.
Like, in some cases, not even an analog, literally just the same. Like when you're like fighting against Stonewall and calling them paedophiles, that is literally exactly what was happening in the 90s. Like with no difference at all, no difference in motivation, no difference in strategy or anything. But they've somehow convinced themselves that it's different this time. And like saying about them coming out later, like it's such a common theme. It's particularly in the like LGBT Alliance crew. I mean, of course, this is common in all homophobes and gender criticals in general, but coming from the few gay people that are gender critical is this idea that no one can know that they're gay before they're 18 or 21 or 25 or whatever it is. And it's just such garbage. Like, I mean, maybe if you do come out later in life and you feel like, you know, people's sexuality is different. And for some people, it's like hard and fast and you find out at 14 and you know straight away. And for other people, it takes a long time to work out their sexuality. And if you're someone who didn't really work it all out until you're 25, that's fine. That doesn't make you any more or less gay or straight than anyone else. But to then go and say, oh, well, this is what it is for everyone. And then when you say, oh, you know, actually some kids know that they're gay when they're 14. And then you're like, no, this is grooming. It's just disgusting because this is just attacking gay people's, like, you know, it's gaslighting them saying you can't know if you're gay at 14. You know, people, it's just, you know, people know. If you actually talk to gay people rather than the 6 shit ones who are part of the gender critical movement, then you'll know that some people know that they're gay when they're 14.
Yeah, so this is also, I think, a conversion therapy thing.
Yes.
I was looking the other day at early Kenneth Zucker and Susan Bradley, who was the original founder of the CAMH Children's Clinic, who worked together with Zucker for a while and then eventually handed it over to him. And they, in like 1985 or so, are interested in the process of like what they're doing to gender identity disorder kids, the prospect that it would prevent them from being gay later in life. And Bradley had this theory of how being gay works, where it's like kind of malleable in adolescence, pretty exactly analogous to Zucker's view that for some reason trans kids have this like longer period of identity malleability than cis kids do, but that for gay kids it's like malleable in adolescence, but if gay teenagers become sexually active, then it'll get ingrained. And so that you have this like critical period until people are like 18 or so. Hi, Bobby.
Sorry. I'm listening.
Yeah, it's like exactly right. It's like you have this like critical period. And so people shouldn't be calling themselves gay until they're like 18 or something. And if they are, it'll make them gay for life.
It's like this kind of, and you often see this particularly for gay men and also bisexual men, this idea that if you one time kiss a man, like, oh, that's it, like you're gay for life now, and we need to prevent that, until you know for sure kind of thing. It's like this idea that straightness is like spoiled. And, I understand that there's some difference in concern and not necessarily in reality about the idea of people exploring their sexuality and people exploring their gender. But this, like, so what? Imagine some straight kid goes off and thinks they're gay and has sex with someone. Then what? Then they're like, oh, I'm not gay. So what? Who cares? But it's this idea that it will make them gay, like just by doing the act for like permanently. Like, oh, if you can, like, if the situation is that you kiss a man and that makes you gay, then that doesn't really, you were just gay. It doesn't make any sense. If it's as simple as kissing someone can change your sexuality, then what are you talking about? It's just so obviously garbage.
Do you want to know the theory?
Go for it.
Is that like young adolescents who like are experiencing same-sex attraction are actually, at least many of them, experiencing like platonic attraction, and they just want to be friends with these people, but they can't tell, and they're confused, and they think it's a sexual attraction. But then if they act on it, they'll have like a reinforcement thing, and then it will become a sexual attraction.
Right. But also that it's worth pointing this out, and I think we've mentioned this on this program before. I'm sorry I'm being distracting with Poppy. She's being really
No, she's
another thing worth pointing out here is this like experiencing same-sex attraction versus being gay. And they always really try and separate the idea of the political identity of being gay versus the reality of same-sex attraction. And this serves quite a few functions. And one is for conversion therapy reasons. They can say, oh, same-sex attraction is just something and you can overcome it. You're not necessarily a gay person. And then it also allows them to say, oh, I don't hate people for who you're attracted to. I just oppose the gay rights activists, the classic. And then it also gives them the chance to say, stop calling kids can't be gay because gay is a political ideology that you take up when you're an adult. So they're just kids with same-sex attractions that might not turn out that way. They might actually get better. And anyone who's just heard me explain all that has even spent 5 minutes talking to gender critical people knows that is exactly how they talk about children with gender dysphoria and how trans kids don't exist. Some have gender dysphoria, but they can get over it. And it's a political ideology to be a trans person. And, the trans agenda and the gay, it's just the same. It's the same thing, identically to what they were doing about gay kids in the 80s. The same.
Yeah. And just to kind of, so you mentioned like how exploring your sexuality is different from exploring your gender. I think importantly, this is like a relatively recent distinction among the opponents, right? So what we see in like the Blanchard type theory, which I think is kind of shared by Bradley and Zucker, is that like being trans is like being super gay, right? So it's like the spectrum of gender variance, where if you're on the more medium side, you're just gay, but then when you go extreme, then you become trans. And so we're seeing people as like this like one kind of cohort of people who some would end up like more extreme than others. It wasn't like this clear.
This is also why that they don't believe there's any such thing as bisexual trans women, because they have this spectrum of like normal gay and super gay, and then they also have like pervert. And if you're bisexual, you can't be on the spectrum of like normal to super gay. All you can be is pervert. Like that's the only explanation for it. And it's also why they have this, like, if you talk to the AGP HSTS fan club, they have really intense requirements for people being counted as this like super gay category. Here where I'm saying super gay, I mean very gay, like Christa is describing it, rather than the new super straight, super gay, we hate trans people movement. But they're mixing up all of their stupid terminology. But there's often you'll hear them say, like, one of them will be like, oh, I've only ever been attracted to men when I was growing up, and like my first boyfriend was when I was 17. They're like, 17? That's too late. You must be a poser because, like, you have to be extremely attracted to men. You had to have, been wanting to having sex with men when you were like 14 or whatever. And then it's kind of ends up clashing with this other view. It's all just such garbage. Anyway, what I was going to say is, if anyone has any questions and wants to, if you tag me in, I'll be more likely to see them. And perhaps we can answer a couple of them if you've got some time, Christa.
Sure.
And but that was pretty intense. Let's go back to the other modes so we can see us book again. I did actually see one question to go past earlier, which was from Rick Nelson, which was, has anyone covered Partners for Ethical Care, which is a new hate book, Desist, Detrans and Detox? It's horrific. So I have seen this, and I actually think I saw someone talking about going for it, but I haven't gone for it myself yet or seen anything. So
yeah, I just heard about this. I have to say, Partners for Ethical Care, though, is I think the organization itself is kind of new, and it's in the American, like, WHRC, Jennifer Billick sphere. They're associated somehow with Joey Bright, who is one of the big Billick promoters. But yeah, it's troubling. Also, this with like the gender mapper part of this general access. But no, we should talk about the conversion therapy, and because you see. With like Fourth Wave Now, which is an American group, kind of like the first that I think inspired the transgender trend and all that stuff. They were kind of a support group type thing for parents that had trans teenagers who they were trying to make not trans. But you see this kind of like pretty similar kind of methodology that lots of them talk about using, which involves like trying to distract their kid and like restricting their access to the internet and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think like following the specific methods that people are coalescing around. Also like a lot of kind of like Jungian, like this weird psychoanalytic stuff. I will check that out for sure.
Yeah.
If anyone has access to the full thing, please let me know.
Yeah, get us a copy. I also just want to point out it's called Desist, Detrans, which are two things they like to conflate, and Detox. And it's this part of this idea that, it not only is being trans a social contagion, but also it's like a drug. And I've seen them saying this before, like about how it's like a slippery slope. And, it's the same arguments they make. Oh, one day you just do a marijuana and the next day you're injecting a cocaine, or, like, it's that one of those kinds of things. And you see them saying about how if you let, say, like young boys play with dolls, then it won't be long until they're prostitutes on the street trying to get genital reassignment surgery. And it's this kind of slippery slope argument. And I think this where this detox thing comes in. It's basically like conversion therapy, but describing it like a drug. Which is just really, really horrible.
Yeah, and toxification of minority groups is very dangerous.
Yeah. We haven't got any questions yet, team. If we don't get one, we'll just end soon. Let's just wait and see if another one comes in. But yeah, so this was another disgusting episode. Thanks for sticking around for it, everyone. Who knows what we'll cover next week? We don't decide until last minute. Yeah, we have got through all of Christa's original folder of stuff now.
Finally!
So that's episode 1 complete.
Yay! Yeah, I have no idea how time works, it seems, when I play.
So we've got one comment here from Mega Jotty. Sorry for the unrelated note. I'm looking for a Zucker quote where he says that parents are much more likely to cooperate with conversion therapy if they're intelligent. Did I dream that?
I can find that for you.
Oh, okay. That is a thing he said then.
Yeah. If this person has Twitter and they at me, I can pull that up for them. I think it is. Well, so off the top of my head, he definitely says this once. He like implies this in a case description called like "I'm half girl, half boy," but he says it elsewhere also. But yeah, I can pull that up pretty quickly.
Ridiculous. Sorry. Go on.
No, I was gonna go off on a tangent. So
okay. Well, I was just gonna go off on a tangent and say I've been watching, and we had a couple of trolls this episode. Thank you very much, mods, for dealing with people. And one of them was like a classic gender critical person, and one of them who's just been hidden, removed from the chat, was called "Women's Rights Are a Mistake." So it's good to see that you're teaming up with the gender criticals. That is a surprise that the Women's Rights Are a Mistake crew are showing up to say the exact same things as the gender critical crew.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So what were you saying?
I was just going to go on to the next question, unless you.
Oh, good. Go for it.
So Samantha Patrick says, has the super straight video been taken down from TikTok? I don't know. I guess so. But you can find it on various. I know Thought Slime did a good takedown of it. I think that's probably the best comprehensive takedown of super straight that I've seen, and it has clips from it in there. So if that's the kind of thing you're looking for. So from Kaz Hatton says, any thoughts on the Nuffield consultation on the ethics of letting kids transition? I don't know what this is. Do you know? Oh, okay. Sorry, Kaz, we don't know. But yeah, I think that might be all then, because we haven't had many questions. Obviously, it was a very comprehensive episode.
We're just too low energy for them, Katy.
Oh, no. Yeah, anyway, thank you very much for sticking around. And we appreciate everyone in the comments, and like and subscribe. Thank you, everyone. Bye.